Welcome back. On the last part, we went deeper into the problems with the animation is cinema mindset, where it is a key factor to why the cartoon community has devolved into a group of gatekeepers, as well as covering a variety of issues where their entitlement can get the best of them, which includes how populism is taking over the group, where the only thing that's keeping the cartoon community alive is the narrative of the people versus the corporate elite, their lack of understanding of indie animation, their behavior during award season, their dependence on nostalgia, how they treat artists and animators in the industry, and how harassment has increasingly become an issue in animation discourses. In this part, however, we're going to be looking into another factor that is not only fueling the toxicity of the cartoon community, but some may also say is the main reason why both the cartoon community and all fandoms in general have become so negative, so toxic, and can be quite unbearable at times. And I am talking, of course, about social media. And on top of covering how their priority for engagement is not just ruining both fans and online personalities alike, I'll also discuss about how one of the cartoon community's main hubs is a certain social media app that has gone on to become one of the worst and most dangerous websites out there. One that can be fairly compared to 4chan and Kiwi Farms. How, you may ask? Well, allow me to explain. However, there is one thing that I do want to bring up, and that has played a very significant factor. Some may say maybe even the biggest factor into how the cartoon community has become so toxic. Because I would go and say that if there is one thing that a cartoon fan would crave so much more than watching cartoons or animation or anything like that, it's engagement, specifically the engagement that they would get on social media platforms. Because the more that they would crave that, the more toxic they ultimately become. Now, I am aware that what I'm about to get into is problems that are more related to social media in general, and that this is a far bigger problem that is even bigger than just within the cartoon community or within fandom culture in general. And I know that there are those people that could even argue that it's because of social media in general that fandoms have now grown to become more and more toxic, that honestly, we would not be here today, and the cartoon community would honestly be so much better without social media. And in terms of that argument, yeah, I completely understand that, and there definitely is a lot of truth to it. But that still doesn't change that the cartoon community is an example of how social media can take a group of people and make them far more toxic than they have ever been before. And that is especially the fact that this is something that everybody knows. This is not even like a YouTuber secret or anything like that. But the easiest way in order to go and get engagement is when you would go and promote negativity. It's when you're more pessimistic and more cynical towards something, and you just bash something down and you just destroy it for everything it has possible. Then of course that's going to be far more likely to be successful in terms of gathering views, to gather engagement, likes and comments and all that kind of stuff, compared to when you would go and try to be more positive towards something. And this is sadly the case where, unfortunately, it is causing quite a problem for animation YouTubers, or I don't know what they're called nowadays, or like this is something, of course, that I'm also a part of. But this is in regards to like, cartoon reviewers or animation reviewers, Anitubers, or what is it that you may go and call it? Basically, YouTubers or influencers who would go and primarily talk about animation. And because of this engagement where negativity is much stronger than positivity, it unfortunately becomes more and more and more rare to find these YouTubers who talk about animation that are generally more positive than they would be negative. Now, I'm not saying that it's like we need to have more YouTubers that only talk about things that they enjoy and that they never make anything or never post anything negative ever. That's not what I'm saying. Of course, it is healthy when from time to time that you would go and talk or discuss about things that you don't like. But what I mean specifically is that it's unfortunately a lot more rare when it comes to finding YouTubers who talk about animation that are generally more positive in terms of what they talk about, just discussing about the things that they do enjoy compared to the things that they don't like or the things that they would hate, like really emphasizing that they don't like this thing or that they want to take down this thing or what have you. It's sadly becoming rare. And even right now, when I'm trying to think of those YouTubers or those online personalities that are generally more positive that are within the cartoon community, honestly, I can only think of a handful compared to all those that are all out there. Like, if I would have to name a few, like maybe Toonrific Tariq, Man of a Thousand Thoughts, Animated Antic, and I've seen some other people bring up a few suggestions, like maybe Nintendo, Hats Off is another one, maybe, but honestly, that's pretty much it. I'm sure maybe you could go and think of a few others as well, but the ratio between people who are more cynical compared to those who are more positive, there is a massive off balance where there is actually a lot more who are generally negative. And even when it comes to me in general, I don't know where I would put into it. I mean, I'll confess, maybe I am one of those that would talk more about the negative stuff towards the positive stuff. And I do wish that I can go and actually improve upon that, where I could talk about more of the things that I can enjoy and just make reviews or make videos about the animated projects that I actually do like. So there is that, in which I will admit to myself that maybe it's something that I can go and actually improve upon. But to go back into the subject of reviewers, now, I just want to go and also say that I am aware this is not just exclusively to animation reviewers. This can also apply to reviewing culture in general, regardless of whatever they may go and review, whether it be stuff like video games or movies in general, TV shows, Legos, or what may have you. But still, though, I want to bring up cartoon reviewers because they could be a prominent example of this. Because the thing is that now it's starting to feel more and more like their intentions are feeling rather questionable, especially with the way that they would become more and more dependent on these types of tactics that are more for the purpose of engagement, more so than to actually genuinely go and express themselves or to go and talk about the things that they would enjoy or the things that they are passionate about, where you would see some that would lean a little bit more towards being cynical, where they would be more frequently talking about things that they do not like, or that the purpose is to go and slam on bad media, much more so than you would see them talking about things that they unironically enjoy or things that they believe to actually be good. And then at the same time, you would also see them be very hyperbolic in terms of how they would go and express things that they don't like, where you would see terms become more common, where they would go and call something either a cinematic disaster, or they would name something as the worst movie or the worst movie in that subgenre, or they would go and declare something something that is frustrating or embarrassing or any of those kinds of terms. And this is not even to mention where they would go and be quite clickbaity with their titles, or even in some cases with their thumbnails as well. So it does reach the point that the more that they would go and lean in on these types of tactics, where you see them go and be heavily cynical again and again and again, and even to the point where they would go and start repeating themselves, where you just see a group of people that are just saying the same thing, it just feels rather questionable in terms of what are ultimately their intentions. That are they really just expressing themselves and expressing how they feel, or are they actually just doing this more so just for the grift, that they're more exaggerating how they feel, where they decided to go really extra and they're just doing this more for the sake of putting on a show because it's more appealing for people to go and watch their stuff, more likely in order to go and get clicks, to get likes, to get subscriptions, and all that kind of stuff. And what's very concerning about seeing them go down this rabbit hole is that now we're starting to see them use the same tactics as those who are at the bottom of the barrel in terms of YouTube. You know which ones I'm talking about. Those culture war fanatics, alt-right, anti-woke YouTubers, where they have no morals whatsoever. They don't even believe in the things in terms of what they would go and say, because for them, it's all about engagement. They don't even care if they're breaking community guidelines on YouTube, such as promoting hate speech, harassment, or misinformation, or what have you. They will go out of their way to go and get the attention of the most reactionary people on the internet just to go and quickly make a profit. Now, I am not saying that cartoon reviewers are becoming more and more like anti-woke culture war grifters and stuff like that. That's not what I am saying at all. You're not going to go and suddenly hear cartoon reviewers suddenly be against, suddenly be against woke culture and be against trans people and all that kind of stuff. What I am saying is that the tactics are starting to become very similar, like how they would go and present their videos, how they would go and talk about certain subject matters. The lines are starting to become a little bit blurred, where now they're starting to do a bit of the same things in terms of the clickbait tactics, or I would even say a little bit with the Disney hate as well. And on top of that, there are those who let their negativity really get carried away, where they just make that their entire personality, where all they do is just go out of their way to just be cynical and snarky and bash whatever media is out there or whatever may be popular to go and hate. And even if they would go and discuss about something that they like, they need to incorporate something to go and hate as well, that they would want to go out of their way and completely weaponize the thing that they say that they enjoy in order to throw hatred onto that particular thing. I mean, case in point, there have been numerous of videos out there where they would talk highly about something like K-pop Demon Hunters, and they would use that to go and bash Disney or bash whatever movie is out at the same time, like Elio. And probably the best example of a reviewer who really let his snarkiness and his negativity go way too far, to the point of exposing himself as really someone who has no idea what they are talking about, then look no further than Alex Meyers. Now, I am aware that when it comes to Alex Meyers, he's not necessarily a cartoon reviewer per se. But considering that a good portion of what he does review is actually animated movies, then he does technically count in terms of what I'm talking about over here. I mean, some could say that he's kind of like a cartoon adjacent reviewer. But going back to the subject that I want to talk about, Alex Meyers, as I am recording this, recently got laughed out of the internet because of putting out what many people are saying is one of the worst reviews of all time, his review of Obsession. But the big catch is that if you look back at his past videos prior to releasing the one of Obsession, I feel like Alex Meyers has fallen off a long time ago. He was already at the point where he was prioritizing engagement a lot more than actually putting out quality reviews, where he was relying a lot more on some desperate clickbait tactics and being a lot cynical towards movies or whatever he would go and talk about for the sake of maintaining his audience. And I mean, keep in mind that he had a massive audience where his channel has over 4 million subscribers. It's just that with what happened with Obsession, it pretty much openly revealed that he doesn't actually know what he's talking about. And I believe this isn't just a case with Alex Meyers, but I think this also applies with all other reviewers who heavily rely on being negative and being cynical regarding what they would go and talk about. These people don't actually know what they are discussing about, that they don't really have strong media literacy. They don't really comprehend what they are watching. Their job is to just go and bash whatever movie that's out there and just try to make it look entertaining, just trying to look cool when hating on movies. That's basically their job. But the problem is, though, is that they're prioritizing their cynicism more so than their understanding of the project itself. And I believe with what happened with Alex Meyers' Obsession review, it was honestly something that was a long time coming, because then you would look past, you would look back at some of his other videos that he has done, like with his Zootopia 2 review, and a lot of it is the same thing. It's just him not comprehending the movie itself or whatever he's talking about, and just prioritizing having a snarky attitude, prioritizing being negative, and prioritizing doing whatever tactics that are needed in order to go and maintain an audience and to go and maintain a business. And this is why I feel like when it comes to YouTube channels that are about reviewing movies and lean in a lot more on being snarky, on being cynical, and being negative compared to just being positive, I honestly feel like they're nothing more but absolute slop. And I feel like we need to start normalizing that term to also apply that onto YouTube channels. I mean, a lot of people are starting to use that as a common term to talk about media that they don't like. But I feel like, honestly, there's a lot of YouTubers out there, especially grifters, that they need to also carry on that label as well. And that's why whenever I see videos that lean in a lot more on just trying to be negative, or especially being more hyperbolic on their negativity, I just can't help but feel like they're nothing more but slop, that their intentions are no different than whenever Disney would go and do a live action remake, because they rely so much on those attention seeking tactics more so than their own skills in terms of being a reviewer. And in that regard, I just don't feel like they're worth listening to. I don't feel like they're really worth watching, because again, they just end up looking like grifters who don't really have anything to go and say other than to just go and repeat what people just want to hear for the sake of getting attention and for the sake of pretending to sound smart, because they just want to go and deliver the blind validation that some reactionaries are desperate to go and hear. So yeah, honestly, when it comes to YouTube channels that are more cynical when it comes to reviews like Alex Meyers, I just feel like they're nothing more but pure slop. And this is also why I believe it is next to impossible that with this negativity that animation YouTubers would keep on enabling, it's becoming more and more rare for any other YouTubers out there to go and become the next big cartoon reviewer. It's becoming a lot harder in order for them to be like the next Saberspark or the next Shafrillas or what have you. And that's mainly because of how they lean in so hard on the negativity, down to the point where it's not just hyperbolic, but it's stupidly exaggerated how they would go and express their negativity. Honestly, this has happened multiple times where I would see smaller animation YouTubers who, like, they're just starting for like a few years and stuff like that. And they would go and throw out terms like objectively in order to emphasize their opinions. Like they would go and force out their opinions by saying that something is objectively good or something is objectively bad. And honestly, it immediately makes me turned off from watching or listening to whatever they say when they're acting so pretentious. If anything, it kind of makes me feel bad thinking like, was that how I sound like when I was doing the whole Sony hate thing? Ugh, like that is just unbearably cringe. Like even if I would agree upon the points that they would provide, they're like, honestly, they're just so unpleasant to listen to, and especially so desperate to try to frame their opinions as fact to the point that they ultimately become unwatchable, and I just don't want to hear any more of whatever else they would go and say. And again, I don't know if they're just doing that because they genuinely are that entitled in terms of their opinion, or they're just really hyping that up for the sake of the grift, for the sake of emphasizing how negativity is more popular and that they believe that the more negative that they can be, the more hyperbolic that they can be with their opinions or how they view things like Disney or a bad piece of media or whatever, that would somehow result in more clicks and more views and more likes and all that kind of stuff. But I just want to say right now, if you want to have the clearest example of the kind of people on social media that are absolute grifters when it comes to animation or talking about animation in general, it is none other than those clones of DiscussingFilms and Culture Crave. Those social media accounts that claim to be animation news, but they only put out small posts and snippets of whatever is actually reported out there. You know the ones that I'm talking about. These are nothing but absolute leeches, where not everything that they would go and report is 100% accurate, and they would just go and completely steal off of the works of actual entertainment journalists just to go and make quick and easy posts to go and say on their social media, where all you have to do, where instead of actually doing proper research about the animation news, you could just go and follow them and they would just spoon feed it to you. And I feel like with those kinds of influencers, those are the kinds that are made for people who want to be like in WALL-E when they're in that by and large ship and they just want everything just spoon fed to them, where they don't have to even lift a finger in order to go and get what they want. Honestly, with those people, and especially with the fact that not 100% of what they would go and report, like none of that would actually be like actual news. And there are times when they would legitimately end up spreading misinformation. These are nothing more but fucking leeches. And these are the kinds of people that I just want to say they do not deserve attention whatsoever. Of course, safe to say, don't go and harass them, but they do not deserve attention. Instead, they only deserve a block. I don't want to hear about these people whatsoever unless they say that they're giving up and that they're deleting their accounts, okay? Like, honestly, do your own proper research in terms of figuring out what is going on in the world of animation. Learn your proper sources of where to find in terms of getting your accurate news in animation. And if you really need one, like a good example I can go and bring out right now is just go to animationmagazine.com. They will definitely go and help you out in terms of delivering animation news. And also, yes, I do know that there might be some people who will say like, well, isn't that what I'm doing as well with Animat's Crazy Cartoon Cast? I never claim to be a news source whatsoever. I am not the main news source for whatever animation news that I would go and talk about right there. In fact, the point of Animat's Crazy Cartoon Cast is not about spreading animation news. It's about expressing my opinions upon those animation news. So I just wanted to go and make that clarification right there. At the very least, I am transparent about it, which is much more than what I could go and say with freaking Toon Hive. So yeah, honestly, again, they don't deserve attention. Just block them whenever you can. And by the way, speaking of this engagement, there's also something that I want to go and bring back again, and that is in regards to indie animation. Because when it comes to indie animation, it's not just that they don't know what indie animation actually is, it's also the fact that some in the cartoon community do not care about indie animation whatsoever. And the main reason is because of engagement. Yes, there are those few where they can easily get a whole bunch of engagement, like with the Amazing Digital Circus or with Has-Been Hotel, but with the grand majority of indie animation in general, nope, that is not happening whatsoever. For them, it might as well just not exist. And even if you would go and tell them about it, they would just not care whatsoever. The only way that they would legitimately care about whatever indie animated project is out there is if they would get that benefit of actually getting some engagement. And sadly, there are those that it would only be for that quick moment, and that is it. Like a great example is in regards to Noja 2. Yes, there was a quick moment where everybody would go and talk about it and how it managed to beat out Inside Out 2 for becoming the new highest grossing animated feature in history. Or another one is with Flow, where that turned out to be the big winner for best animated feature, where it beat out some of the mainstream ones, including Inside Out 2, The Wild Robot, and Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul. But in that regards, however, while I would have the spotlight for the cartoon community for beating out Disney or for beating out mainstream, right afterwards, they're not going to care. How many people in the cartoon community nowadays do you see talking about Noja 2 or Flow as movies as they are? How many of them would genuinely want to go and talk about Noja 2 if they have seen that feature or talk about the quality in that film? Or how many people want to talk about Flow and if they have seen that film and actually want to talk about the quality in that feature? If there's no engagement to be had to go and talk about certain indie projects, then the community is just not going to care whatsoever. But if you want the biggest evidence in terms of how those toxic people in the cartoon community actually do not care about indie animation, or I would even say a good chunk of the cartoon community doesn't care about indie animation, since this is something that I brought up, then let's go back to award season. Of course, during that time, animation fans are going to really go and talk about best animated feature. They're going to go and talk about who deserves to be nominated, who deserves to go and win, how many more awards does it deserve to go and have, and so on and so forth. But notice how most, if not almost all of those people who go and really get into the discussions about best animated feature, almost none of them talk about best animated short. Because the funny thing with best animated short nowadays is that it's now very rare that a mainstream studio would actually find its way to get a nomination in that category. Even DreamWorks and Disney is having a bit of a hard time with getting their shorts that they produce to go and actually grab a nomination. I think the last time was a few years back. I mean, some could argue maybe what was it? The boy, the mole, the fox, and the horse. Like, considering that's an Apple production, maybe that could be considered a mainstream one. Or even before that, there was Robin by Aardman, or even before that, there was Burrow by Pixar. But the point is that nowadays it's extremely rare that a mainstream studio would get a nomination in that category, which leaves room for indie animation to thrive. Debatably, the best animated short category is one of the biggest platforms for indie animation to go and showcase their work. And it's from there where you actually see a wide variety of art styles that has never been seen before. Many different styles of storytelling, many new creators finally getting their moment to shine and actually winning an Oscar for it. You would think that people who claim to be supporters of indie animation, they would go and actually care more about what's going on with Best Animated Short than they would with Best Animated Feature. But no, you would actually have a much harder time to find anyone to go and have a discussion about the animated shorts or what would be nominated in there, or even their opinions on like who they think should win and stuff like that. And I will say it would be one thing if they didn't have access before. Like, it would be one thing if, it's hard to go and find like a screening or a way to go and watch these animated shorts. Like, in that regards, okay, I can understand that. But lately, it has become easier than ever, especially when these creators would go and actually post them on YouTube for free. In fact, there was a moment when, with the last Oscars, just about all of them were actually available on YouTube to go and watch. And to this day, you could actually still go and check them out. Like, on YouTube, you could actually go and check out some of the recent nominees and the winner, like with The Girl Who Cried Pearls, Forever Green, Retirement Plan. Those are still available on YouTube. But even if there's a way to be easily accessible, you're not going to see most of the cartoon community actually bite because there's not much engagement that they can go and get. Because for them, they get a lot more attention and they get a lot more engagement if they would go and talk about who deserves to win, Zootopia 2 or K-pop Demon Hunters, than they would if they would have a discussion about who deserves to win, The Girl Who Cried Pearls or Forever Green. Most of them, they won't know what you're talking about, and most of them aren't even going to care in the first place, which really does emphasize that with indie animation, there's only a very specific few that they actually do care about. And for them, that very selected few, that massive minority, is enough to go and reflect upon indie animation as a whole. And I'm sure there are going to be those people who will go and ask, well, why don't we go and actually ask those animation YouTubers to go and give those smaller indie projects or some of the lesser known stuff a platform? Maybe they can help out to go and introduce audiences to those projects so that they can have a moment of in the spotlight to go and check them out. Which, I mean, it's great. It's a great idea in theory, but in practice, however, animation fans are sadly not going to go and bite. And again, this is something that I can speak from experience, because honestly, you would have, like, if you want to go and make a video about an obscure project, then, or if you want to go and talk about an indie project that is not as popular in the animation sphere, you would have to go and desperately put out a lot of clickbait in order to grab attention. I mean, I know know that there can be a lot of downsides and like, yeah, it does seem like grifting tactics in order to go in that clickbaity direction. Like I know that with Saberspark, for example, he has been guilty of a lot of those clickbait tactics, which has done some negative consequences. But when it comes to talking about more obscure or like some indie projects that are not popular, in that regards, that's when I don't blame creators like Saber who would have to go and use those clickbait tactics in an attempt to try to get attention from people to go and actually watch it and to actually present, hey, here are the reasons why you should go and watch it, because normally they would just not bite. If they're not familiar with it, like if you want to go and make a review of something like a Boy in the World, or if you want to go and talk about something like even Persepolis, for example, or even the ones that I've mentioned, like with Noja 2 or with Flow, if you want to go and make a review of those right now, you would have to depend on those desperate clickbait tactics just in the hopes that it would actually gather attention and give the cartoon community a reason why to go and check this thing out, let alone like check your video out and stuff like that. Like you would really have to go far in terms of like, again, being desperate with your clickbait to show that, hey, this is worth paying attention to and worth checking out. Because with the cartoon community, they would rather engage with things that they already know, that they have already seen. It's very rare that you would find those in the community that are willing to go and discover something new, that they're willing to go and want to check something that they've never heard of before. And that's honestly very unfortunate, because ultimately, with the consequence of all this is that it really highlights that with a good amount of the cartoon community, or I would even say with most of the cartoon community, they only consume what is mainstream. And this even includes what is mainstream within indie animation. And what really sucks is that this ultimately really limits the amount of animation that the cartoon community would go and ultimately watch. Because if they're really motivated with engagement, if they want to just check out the stuff that others are talking about and that they want to get into the cool trends and just see the things that are popular or whatever, then in that regards, it really does highlight how they're just missing out on some lesser known things that not only deserve to have attention, but might be hidden gems, or maybe like their favorite movie could be something that no one has heard of. I mean, I can guarantee you right now, maybe you have never heard of a movie called Son of the White Mare, but for me, when I saw it, it is absolutely gorgeous. It is a phenomenal animated feature that I feel like many animation fans, if not all animation fans, deserve to go and check out. But because it's a movie that is obscure, people are not going to go and bother, because what are they going to go and gain out of it? If they can't get much engagement in terms of experiencing that and then talking about it on social media, then it would just be a waste of time. So in that regards, it really does limit how much cartoons that the cartoon community would ironically go and check out, which again, really does explain so much about how that mentality really does limit their experience with animation in the first place. And you could really tell when there are some people in the community or in fandoms in general where they are highly dependent on social media just to have a life in general, where they have literally built their entire life on social media down to the point where that's the only way that they could communicate with other people, that there's a lot more going on with their life online than there actually is offline. And it's pretty frightening, because that's where the term terminally online comes from. And sadly, you will find in many fandoms, including in the cartoon community, where there are those that really can be like that, and that they're just causing more problems within the group than actually contributing in a better and more meaningful way, especially when they prioritize engagement above everyone else in a more concerning way, like legitimately prioritizing engagement over their own principles, where it could be that bad. And there are certain cases where there are those on some websites where it could be worse than others. And there is one in particular that has gone down to become one of the absolute worst out there, that it's honestly rather shocking to see that many in the cartoon community are still heavily involved in there. And what I am talking about is in regards to Twitter. And yes, I'm still going to be calling it Twitter because who the fuck says X? I mean, seriously, I think Elon Musk is actually responsible for making the letter X look uncool. And I think with the way that he has handled Twitter really is a prominent example of that. Now, with that said, I know that there is a fair share of toxicity that can be found on all social media websites, not just on Twitter, of course, but also on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, even Blue Sky can have its fair share of problems where toxicity can be found in there too. But I find that it's on Twitter where you see it as the most rampant. Now, it is true that it has always been bad on Twitter, but I can't help but find that ever since Elon Musk took over, the toxicity that brews within that website, it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, where it's not just normalized, but it created a system where it encourages toxicity, where it really highlights how engagement is so important and that people would go do, they would go and do anything in order to capture engagement and attention by any means necessary, even if it means throwing out their own morals, their own ethics, their own principles, just for the sake of getting attention. And regardless if it's for grifting reasons or if it's for trolling reasons, there are people out there who just want to get easy engagement by picking a fight or saying something offensive to shock people and to go and get reactions out of others. It really has become a website where it champions and rewards reactionaries, and not just cynicism, but it rewards straight up outrage, like really rewarding people to let out the worst of them, to really bring out their absolute worst behaviors in the hopes that people can get rewarded with clicks and views and likes and all that kind of stuff. And one thing that I personally find to be so messed up is that this is something that everybody knows about. In fact, whenever you would hear some drama or some controversy occur, of course, one of the main places that will immediately happen, or one of the most prominent places that would occur, will indeed be Twitter. If you ever hear whatever online controversy, or you hear something that's causing a fandom to explode in outrage, it's most likely going to be happening on Twitter more so than any of the other websites, rather it be Facebook, Instagram, or Blue Sky, TikTok, YouTube, or what have you. It's always going to be Twitter where it's the source of fandom outrage. And yes, this does even include the cartoon community. And this is something that everybody knows. And honestly, it's frustrating that everybody seems to know about it, yet don't want to do a single thing about it either. In fact, I actually remember when Saberspark made his initial video where he addressed the controversy regarding his allegation of him sexually assaulting someone, which again, thankfully was proven to be false. And there was one moment where Saber would go and actually talk about how the toxicity on Twitter has become more and more extreme, and it has become more and more rampant.
I have been on Twitter since 2012, but in early 2020, I noticed that the culture of the website had begun to change. It was more combative and antagonistic, and the website started to reward that kind of engagement. There has been an ongoing weaponization of online vigilantism. People who adopt a shoot first and ask questions later mentality in the quest to make a name for themselves without doing their due diligence. They would prefer to try to shape the world for what they believe the problem is, rather than actually assisting in the solution.
And I was just watching it going, yes, he gets it. He understands how Twitter has become such a horrible place and that it's only getting worse from there. But what's also frustrating is just, why the fuck is he not doing anything about it? Why is he not going out of his way to take action and get himself out of that place? Why does he want to go and stay there when he knows that the place has been so bad lately? I mean, yeah, some people could argue that there is still some good, but it honestly feels like, again, there is far more negativity that is going on that website than positivity. And in the case of Twitter, it really is at the point where it feels unhealthy. It really is at the point that it's just so toxic, where using Twitter is a lot like taking cigarettes. There's only enough times that you could go and take it until you inevitably become a cancer. And that's how I feel with what's going on Twitter and all of the toxicity. I mean, I remember, like, I quit the website at the start of 2024, and a big part of it is because I wanted to go and value my own mental health, because honestly, I saw how the toxicity was going, and I did take my time to go and adjust myself where I would become, independent from Twitter, where I just no longer need it in my life. So in that regards, it's honestly insane for me, where not just with the community, but especially with many YouTubers, many of the prominent figures in the cartoon community, and let alone like many of the prominent animators who are still there, that they still remain on Twitter. And it's honestly perplexing. And honestly, as a result, it makes it harder for me to feel sympathetic for whenever they would become the target of hate on that website. Like, I remember when people would talk about how those like Shafrillas or Mr. Enter, where they would be prominent targets of hate and they would get bombarded with harassments and comments that easily go too far. And while there was a part of me that did feel sorry for them and do feel bad that they're getting that unnecessary treatment, there was also a part of me that is just saying that they're kind of doing this to themselves by still staying on that website in particular. And that only scratches the surface in terms of the problems that are with Twitter. Because there's also another thing that I find so perplexing that the community is still staying on Twitter, and that is in regards to AI. Because I know that there are going to be people out there who will say that, well, technically all social media websites or all websites in general will have a bot problem. And that definitely is true. However, how many bots are in a particular website will definitely vary. But there is no denying that the one who has it the worst of them all, or at least in terms of the big name websites, is undeniably Twitter. Because the thing with Twitter, it has often been reported that over half of the active users that are there are nothing but bots. And what's more, whenever there is a major event that would happen, that number would just ramp up to 75% of active users, maybe even more. So it really is at the point that regardless of the followers that you may have, how many views you may get in a post, how many likes that you would go and receive, all of that is heavily manipulated by bots. Or in a way, a lot of that has been manipulated by AI. And I feel like we should be in an age where we should normalize the idea that using Twitter is indeed using AI. Like, however you would go and use Twitter in any capacity, yes, it is a lot like using AI and using those apps like ChatGPT and what have you. But what's even worse, however, is that with Twitter, it's not just with the bots that really makes it an AI website. There is also the factor of Grok. Grok, honestly, I feel like is the thing that should have shut down Twitter immediately and have Elon Musk arrested. Because not only whenever you would use Twitter in any capacity, whether it be posting a video, putting up an image, or even just making a simple little post, all of it is immediately fueled onto Grok, onto Twitter's AI system in order to go and feed that in particular. But the thing is with Grok is that it has some notorious moments where it's not that it malfunctions, but the way that it functions is just straight up criminal. Where there are times where it would be so extremist with some of its comments, down to the point where it infamously called itself Mecha Hitler. And let's not forget that it does have those AI tools in order to go and produce CSAM. That basically whatever image that you would go and put up, that if it has kids involved, you know that there are going to be those absolute creeps that will go and turn that into pornography. And that alone, I felt like that should have been the straw that broke the camel's back for people, especially for those who are anti-AI. And yet that is not enough for anybody to budge, especially when those tools, while it's not as easily and like freely accessible for anyone, it's not fully gone. And especially when it comes to the cartoon community, that's the thing that really makes it rather perplexing when it comes to them still staying on Twitter. Because you cannot find a more anti-AI group than the cartoon community. Or I would even say with the entire like animation base, not just with the fandom, but also with creators and with artists and animators as well. Like this is a very prominently anti-AI group out there. And yet even with those AI tools that are on Twitter, that is not enough for people to go and budge or to go and immediately boycott the website for having those AI tools or to really integrate AI onto the website in the first place. It's wild to me when I see people saying that Disney should be boycotted because of the idea of possibly integrating AI onto things like Disney Plus or in the Disney parks or what have you, but they wouldn't be willing to go and do the same thing with Twitter. Now, if you want to go and boycott Disney with whatever AI idea that they want to go and do, I completely understand. But if you're not going to go and do the same thing with Twitter that already has those AI things already featured on the website, then at that point, it feels like those acts of activism is just performative. And this is not even to mention about some of the more political factors or even really diving into the aspect of Elon Musk, of how he's just trying to use it as his main platform to go and spread his far-right extremist ideologies, or the fact that he's trying to go and use that in order to freely promote what is basically Nazism, where it is the website where you would get the least amount of consequences if you would go and spread white supremacist ideologies, or you would go and do things that normally would go and have you banned on any other website out there, rather it be with like spreading misinformation, spreading out hate speech, promoting harassment, and all that kind of stuff. Like, really, this is why Twitter nowadays has an infamous reputation of being a Nazi bar right now. And I mean, it's one thing to just straight up ignore politics, but considering right now with how Twitter is and the things that they would go and have put out over the recent years, ever since Elon Musk took over, like if Nazis and CSAM that is generated by AI or or even like the AI system that's already in there, if that is not enough for you to go and straight up quit Twitter altogether and take your habits of social media somewhere else, then honestly, like what's going to make you quit the website altogether? What's ultimately going to cause you to go and leave? And I will say this, sure, it's one thing to just be there for like business purposes. It's one thing to still be on Twitter if you want to go and use that to promote your work exclusively, or if you're doing investigation and see what other people are saying on Twitter. Okay, that is one thing right there. But if you're still regularly using it as a social media platform to go and share memes, to go and interact with others, to go on to DMs, to share videos and to share images and stuff like that, that's where I feel like, honestly, that's where you're enabling the problems that Twitter is putting out right there. And it's wild that when bringing this up, people will just have a more apathetic attitude in regards to social media, where some people will just say, they're all the same. So it doesn't matter if you use either Twitter or Facebook or what have you. And yet it's crazy how they can be apathetic towards that, but still let out crazy biases when it comes to animation studios, whether it be with Disney or Sony or DreamWorks or what have you. Like, honestly, this is a prominent example of those who are still mainly active on Twitter that they don't have their priorities straight. Twitter is a clear, massive problem where you see like all the attributes that's causing the community to become so much worse, and yet nobody wants to do a single thing about it. And like I mentioned before, when it comes to the nostalgia problem, it's mainly because of the fact that they don't want to change. They view change as the enemy. So of course they don't want to quit Twitter if it means that they have to go and change their regular everyday habits. And what makes that even worse is that knowing the toxicity that is going on with Twitter, I feel like that is going to be the big thing that will cause the cartoon community to straight up implode in itself. Because keep in mind, with the cartoon community, it really is a niche and tight group where everybody is keeping an eye on everyone. And not to mention that the standard of what is considered controversial is so low. And when you have a website like Twitter that encourages outrage and controversies and trying to call people out for even just the smallest things, you can imagine that it will just speed up the process where they will go rampant and they will go crazy with all the controversies and calling everybody out for whatever stupid and minor reason, to the point where everybody is just pretty much going to be canceled. And it's going to be at the point where it's no longer cool to just be an animation fan altogether. Like, nobody is willing to go and highlight that, yes, Twitter is a serious problem that's becoming a massive detriment to the cartoon community, but nobody wants to go and take action on it because they don't want to lose whatever followers that they have or whatever friends that they have made in there. In fact, that's actually one of the most common reasons why people want to go and stay on Twitter. Whenever you would go and confront them by saying, why are you not leaving Twitter with all of these problems? They'll acknowledge it, but they'll go and tell you that, oh, I don't want to lose my fans. I don't want to lose my friends. Which, okay, that is one thing. And I'm not going to lie. Whenever people would go and use that excuse, I find that to be a little bit cute. I find that to be quite hilarious, actually, because when you do think about it, it really is such a dumb excuse that just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And it gives you far less reason to even stay there in the first place. And it actually says more about them over something else than their actual reasons of what they have stated. Now, I'm just going to go and say right now, I will not doubt you if you have actually made friends on Twitter. I'll definitely believe you on that. But I think it is safe to say that friendship should be stronger than any other social media website out there. It should be stronger than anything on the website whatsoever. Because true friends have a much stronger bond than just a simple connection on a website. So let's say you're in a situation where you're thinking about quitting Twitter, but you have friends that are still on Twitter. So in that situation, you would go and tell your friends, hey, I'm thinking about leaving Twitter. I'm not agreeing with what's been going on in here, and I'd rather just separate myself from all the toxicity and all the controversies that is connected with Twitter. In that case, if they really are your friends, they would want to make sure that you are still connected with them outside of Twitter. And even if they live like far away in another country, in another continent or whatever, they would want to make sure that there is another means that they could still connect with you, rather it be on another social media website like Facebook, for example, or maybe they want to stay in touch with you by phone, or maybe they want to use something like Discord or something like that. Either way, true friends will try to find a way to respect your decisions and also to stay in touch by different means. Because again, friendship should be much stronger than Twitter. And the same goes with fans as well. I know that there are creators out there with hundreds of thousands of followers, maybe even millions, where they don't want to lose those big numbers. But if you would go and tell your fans, hey, I'm no longer using Twitter, I'm going to go and move somewhere else. And if you want to still connect with me on social media, you could go and follow me on this one. Then in that regards, your real fans will follow you no matter what. They don't care about which website it is that they want to go and stay in touch, where they want to know like what you're saying and all that kind of stuff. They want, like, no matter what, no matter where it is, they still want to connect with you regardless of where you can be available. So at the end of the day, it should be not a concern whatsoever when you actually do think about it, because your real friends and your real fans will want to stay connected with you no matter what. And that's what ultimately makes it funny, because there's nothing to fear if they really are your friends or if they really are your fans, because they'll follow you no matter what, because the end all deal is not where you are on social media in general. They will go and follow you as long as you can be available. So what those people fear the most, it's not that they would lose friends or that they would lose fans. What they fear the most is that they're just living an entire lie. Because I'll say this, if you decide to leave Twitter and you never hear from those friends or from those fans again, they were never your friends. They were never your fans to begin with. At that point, that's the reality you would have to face, where you're just living a lie and those people were just using you. Because again, friendship should be stronger than a social media connection. And if the friendship would end just because you decide to leave Twitter, that's not much of a friendship whatsoever. And it's the same thing with the fan base. If you're a popular creator and you decide to quit Twitter and you don't see all those fans coming back to you, well, all those fans who didn't follow you, they are not your fans to begin with. So at that point, you don't really have as much to lose than you may actually think. Well, that's going to be it for this part, but there is one more that's going to be coming up after this. And not only will I be covering the problems with the cartoon community's growing dependence on bandwagoning, but you will also see why I called this "I've had enough with the cartoon community." In a way, this is where all the parts are going to come together. So with that said, thank you for watching, and until next time.